Hi, and welcome to the 12th and final lecture on Shakespeare's Hamlet. And let's begin by turning to the final act, Act 5, Scene 2. I'm on page 1489 in your anthologies. And this is the moment just before the duel between Laertes and Hamlet, the sword fight. And Hamlet is speaking with Horatio. He tells Horatio that he's feeling a bit uneasy. Something's disturbing him. He says something is ill, all here, about his heart. And Horatio responds, look, if something's bothering you, if you're feeling at all uneasy, then don't proceed. Don't engage in this contest with Laertes. Horatio says at line 203, if your mind dislike anything, obey it. I will forestall their repair hither, and say, you are not fit. And Hamlet's response, not a whit, we defy augury. He defies superstition. He's saying, I'm not a superstitious man. I'm not a superstitious man. Why is he saying this? The realist would argue he's certainly not being rational here. He's not a man of reason here, is he? Because he knows at this point that Claudius wishes to have him killed. He also knows that Laertes longs to revenge his father Polonius's murder. Remember, Hamlet murdered Polonius, Laertes' father. So both of these men wish to harm Hamlet. And Hamlet has accepted this challenge, this sport, to participate in this sport, this sword fight with Laertes. So Hamlet should be thinking rationally here, but he isn't, is he? Um, Instead, he says, not a whit, we defy augury. He's not a superstitious man. He defies augury. And of course, here again, we see Hamlet's classical training, his understanding of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and how the majority of ancient Greeks and ancient Romans, they were superstitious people. They did, subscribe to augury. And Hamlet says, no, he is not one of those uh, superstitious people. And he says instead, there is a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. A special providence in the fall of a sparrow. And if you note at the bottom of the page, yes, there's a footnote here, footnote number 7. The editor writes, this is a reference to Matthew, which is a book in the New Testament of the Christian Bible, the religious text that Christians uh, believe is the word of the Christian God. In Matthew, it says, are not two sparrows sold for a farthing, and one of them shall not fall on the ground without your Father. The idea is that the Christian God is all knowing and all powerful, and nothing happens on this earth without uh, the Heavenly Father's knowing it, or without the Heavenly Father's willing it, because He is a supernatural entity who is both all knowing and all powerful. And so here the editor says this is God's direction for a specific event over and above general providence, the whole shape of God's design, the divine plan. The Christian God has a divine plan. It's interesting the editor refers here to the Christian God as God alone with a capital G. Yes, I think a realist would probably complain about this. That's why, remember, I've told you it's important not to speak of the Christian God as God and not to capitalize uh, the name God, because it suggests that this being actually does exist, and is the true God. So we can't make that assumption, the realist would argue. There's simply no evidence to support it. But at any rate, it's the idea of what Hamlet is saying here. There's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow, that there is a divine plan in place, uh, and that plan can't be altered with, it can't be changed. And this idea that Hamlet is simply placing himself in the hands of his God and realizes that it's all ordained, that the future is ordained, and there's nothing Hamlet can do, so there's no need to be superstitious about the future. We see this idea of Hamlet's uh, operating earlier in the play, don't we? Particularly in the scene where Claudius announces to Hamlet that Hamlet is to be sent to England. I would argue that this belief of Hamlet's, that Hamlet is in the hands of divine providence, that there's a special providence in the fall of the sparrow, and there's nothing Hamlet can do. This, I would argue, is yet another deterministic factor in Hamlet's delay. He will not move forward. He will not act. He will simply be acted upon. He will allow the Christian God to act through him. And you can see that that has rather dangerous implications, doesn't it? I mean, it really gives someone who believes, or a group of people who believe that a particular God is working through them and is operating through them, and gives them a uh, kind of carte blanche, doesn't it? Gives them a kind of permission to behave how they wish. And again, recall Shakespeare's day. People believed they were uh, fighting in the name of the Christian God, that they were soldiers, Christian soldiers, marching in the battle, and that the Christian God was working through them. We recall the Crusades. We think of the Inquisitions. Uh, we remember the Protestant and Catholic wars, or the burning of women who were believed to be witches. And so this is certainly a dangerous notion. One person can do a lot of harm if he or she believes that a God, a supernatural entity, is working through him or her. And therefore, this person thinks that whatever action uh, he is taking or she is taking is the correct action. It's what the God wills, it's what the God desires, it's all part of a divine plan. And it certainly can become quite dangerous, lead to all kinds of unethical behavior when a large group of people hold this belief. And so this is yet another cause for Hamlet's delay. It's at this point in the play that he really, if you think about it, he's decided he doesn't need a plan uh, of revenge any longer. He's simply going to allow his God. He's going to put his faith, his trust in his God, and allow his God to decide for him the outcome, ultimately, what will occur uh, concerning this question of revenge. And again, as I was saying, we've seen Hamlet beginning to believe in this fashion earlier in the play. And if you recall, back in Act 4, Scene 3, when Claudius first informs Hamlet that Hamlet's to be sent to England, Hamlet acts surprised. He acts shocked, doesn't he, to hear such news? He cries out, "England!" as if this is news to him. So he's surprised. But we remember that prior to that scene between Claudius and Hamlet, we remember the closet scene in Act 3, Scene 4, when at the end of that scene, Hamlet informs his mother, Gertrude, that he knows already that he's to be sent to England. And not only does he know that he's being shipped off to England, but he also knows that his childhood friends, his former childhood friends, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, are to accompany him. They are to go with him on the voyage to England. He also, in addition, he also suspects that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern have nefarious intentions, that they are conspiring with the king, and that there's a plot in place to do harm to Hamlet, to injure Hamlet, most likely to kill Hamlet. He knows all of these things before this confrontation he has with Claudius. And so the question becomes, how can Hamlet possibly know this? Why does he feign surprise here? Why does he pretend as if this is the first time he's hearing that he's um, to be shipped to England? Claudius, Hamlet responds England, and then he says good, so he accepts. He doesn't, notice too, he doesn't in any way argue with Claudius or object to being sent to England. He simply responds, good. And Claudius answers, it is good. And if you knew our intentions, you would realize that it's good, that we're sending you to England. And of course, Claudius is meaning that for Hamlet's own safety, Hamlet needs to be sent away from Denmark because he has killed Polonius, and this might uh, put Hamlet's life in danger. There could be those who wish to harm Hamlet for his having killed Polonius. And so, for Hamlet's own safety, he's to be sent away until uh, the, the situation, until people can become calm and think rationally. So it's for Hamlet's safety. Of course, Claudius also means when he says, if you knew our purposes, uh, yes, if you knew our purposes, it would be good. Claudius, of course, also means, Claudius knows at this point that he's having Hamlet sent to his death in England. So Claudius is for Claudius's purposes. It's good for Claudius to have Hamlet executed, to have Hamlet beheaded by the king, by the King of England, to be shipped off to England and beheaded. And of course, Hamlet responds. It's Hamlet, of course, knows this. Claudius doesn't know that Hamlet realizes or is known that he's to be sent to England. So Hamlet knows he's to be executed. And he tells Claudius, when Claudius says, if you knew our intentions, you would realize that it is good that I'm sending you to England. And Hamlet responds, I see a cherub that sees them. I see a cherub that sees them. A cherub that sees and understands your intentions. And what does Hamlet mean here by a cherub? Well, most critics argue that yes, Hamlet does know. He knows in the closet scene that he's to be sent to England, and that the cherub here that Hamlet is referring to, that Hamlet is speaking literally, that it's the ghost who has informed Hamlet of Claudius's designs. The ghost is sending him to is sending the ghost has informed Hamlet that Claudius is sending Hamlet to England to be executed, to be beheaded. Remember, cherubs in classical mythology, cherubs were messengers from the gods, and the ghost. Uh, Again, most critics are arguing that the ghost is a messenger. Uh, you could think of the ghost as a messenger from the Christian God, a cherub, who has informed Hamlet of what is to occur, of Claudius's plans, Claudius's scheme. But there simply isn't any evidence in the text to support uh, this interpretation that it's the ghost who has told Hamlet. Remember, in the ghost's second appearance, the second meeting with Hamlet, when he appears in the closet scene, when the ghost appears in the closet scene, he doesn't inform Hamlet at that time of Claudius's plan. He doesn't mention it to Hamlet. So there really isn't any evidence in the text to support that interpretation. So what could Hamlet mean by there's a cherub that sees Claudius's intentions, Claudius's true intentions? It's not that Claudius is sending Hamlet to England for Hamlet's own safety, but rather that Claudius is sending Hamlet off to be killed. Um, who is this cherub? There are some critics who say, and I would agree with them, that the cherub is Claudius's secretary. Uh, Remember, Claudius is the king of Denmark. He is a man of royalty, and he does not write out his own commissions. He has a secretary, a scrivener, as it's called in the play, a secretary or a clerk, if you will, who writes out the commissions for Claudius. Um, a lackey, if you will. And the scrivener, the secretary, has informed Hamlet. He has come to Hamlet and told Hamlet what is in the commission that Claudius has had his secretary write out, that Hamlet is to be murdered, executed in England. Um, yes, and there's quite a bit of evidence to support this in the text, this idea in the text. And first, we remember that Hamlet is beloved of the people. Claudius himself says this a few times in the play, that the multitude loves Hamlet. And we also recall that the guards who witness the ghost beginning of the play, Marcellus and Bernardo, as well as Horatio. Remember, the guards and Horatio, they owe their loyalty first to the king, to King Claudius. But instead of telling Claudius of the ghost's appearance, they tell Hamlet. Their loyalty is first and foremost to Hamlet. They are loyal to Hamlet first. And they tell Hamlet of the ghost's appearance, of the apparition. And so Hamlet is beloved of the people, of the multitude. And we recall that Claudius was elected king to Denmark and was elected by the noblemen, the people at court, the courtiers, the people in power, the people who have political power. And it may be that some of the guards, like Marcellus and Bernardo, and people like Horatio, and of course, people in general, the Danish people, it may be that they too believe that Hamlet should have been the rightful heir, that he should have ascended to the throne. And this is why they are loyal to Hamlet rather than to the king. And there's certainly plenty of time for the secretary to inform Hamlet of the commission that the secretary has written out. Remember, all the way back, we first learned that Claudius has determined to send Hamlet to England just after the confrontation between Hamlet and Ophelia, just after that brutal confrontation, the nunnery scene, if you recall. Just following Hamlet's to be or not to be soliloquy. That's all the way back in Act 3, Scene 1. Claudius says he's determined to send Hamlet to England. That's the moment where Hamlet has an opportunity because Hamlet is, or Claudius has an opportunity to uh, inform Polonius that Hamlet shall be sent to England because of Hamlet's disturbed behavior in that scene with Ophelia. This provides Claudius with an opportunity. So this is where we first learn in this scene. Act 3, Scene 1 is the scene in which we first learn that Claudius is determined to send Hamlet to England. But Claudius may have, in fact, decided much sooner, may have decided as early as the moment that Claudius ascended the throne to have Hamlet done away with, executed. Because Claudius does believe Hamlet to be a threat. Remember, Claudius is a political man, and Claudius has stepped in between the throne and Hamlet. Claudius has seized power while Hamlet is away at the university. So Claudius may have already had designs as early as after just having ascended to the throne. Remember, Claudius makes this public announcement in the court scene, all the way back in Act 1, Scene 2, that before the entire court, Claudius announces that Hamlet is the immediate heir, the next in line to the throne. And how shrewd, how clever of Claudius to make that announcement publicly when all the time he has uh, designs on Hamlet's life. So there would have been plenty of opportunity for Hamlet to for Claudius's clerk, his secretary, to inform Hamlet. And the secretary, as I said, the clerk may uh, the clerk's loyalties may be to Hamlet, not to Claudius. This is what a few critics argue. Most critics argue that it's the ghost who informs Hamlet. But a few do say it is the secretary of Claudius, Claudius's scrivener, his clerk. And there's also evidence in that fantastic tale that Hamlet relates to Horatio, the tale concerning Hamlet's sea voyage, as well as the tale surrounding the pirates, the pirate story that uh, Hamlet informs Horatio of the pirate tale in a letter. So neither one of these stories, the story that Hamlet relates about the sea voyage and the story about the pirates, Hamlet's confrontation with the pirates while at sea, neither one of these two stories is presented for us sitting in the audience. We don't see what happens in these stories. All we do is hear Hamlet relate the story personally to Horatio, the story of the sea voyage, and then by letter he tells Horatio of the pirate tale, the pirate escapade. So we don't have direct proof of these stories. And if you think about it, when you think carefully about the story, at the beginning of Act 5, Scene 1, or Act 5, Scene 2, rather, Hamlet relates the sea voyage to Horatio. And let's recall, this story is rather fantastic, isn't it? Hamlet makes a number of extraordinary claims in the story. So these critics argue, these few critics who believe that it is the secretary, Claudius' secretary, who is the cherub, a messenger, if you will. Yeah, let me mention first that idea of cherub again. So Hamlet is speaking figuratively when he says, I see a cherub that sees your intentions, Claudius. But Hamlet may also be thinking, again, figuratively, but Hamlet, I would argue here, I haven't seen any critics argue this point. I would argue that when Hamlet uses the word cherub, that he believes. Hamlet believes that again the Christian God is working through Claudius' secretary. That it's all part of the design, the divine plan, the divine design here. It's all part of the providential order of things. And so the cherub, the messenger, is a kind of cherub of the Christian God, or the secretary is a kind of messenger a cherub of the Christian God here when he informs Hamlet of Claudius's intentions, of Claudius's true intentions. Hamlet imagines, and that's why he uses the word cherub here, he imagines the Christian God working through Claudius's secretary, informing Hamlet of the danger of Claudius's plan. So this brings us to this tale, Hamlet's tale of his sea voyage, and recall again the extraordinary claims that Hamlet makes as to what occurred at sea. Hamlet says that the first night at sea, that again Hamlet something he's not sure, just as he says in this passage here that we've just discussed, or we're in the process of discussing. Hamlet says, the first night at sea, if you recall, he's feeling uneasy, something's bothering him. He doesn't know what it is. He's disturbed. And so he prefaces his story with this idea that there's a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them how we may. So before he relates this story to Horatio, he, again, this same idea, he presents that there is this heavenly plan in place, and no matter how human beings try to rough hew, right there, uh, there's a divinity that shapes our ends. No matter how we human beings try to shape our ends, again, that calls into question the impossibility of free will for the monotheist who believes in an all-knowing deity. But at any rate, this idea of the divinity shapes one's ends. Again, Hamlet is telling Horatio before he relates the story that everything that occurs because the Christian God has willed it. He desires it. The Christian God knows in advance what is to occur because there is already a divine plan in place. There's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. There's a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them how we may. So again, Hamlet is seeing himself in the hands of the Christian God. And if the Christian God has a particular intention or purpose, then he will work that plan out through by using Hamlet. Hamlet is the means here. So, what is Hamlet? Let's think about this story. Hamlet says the first night at sea, he's feeling uneasy, he's restless, he doesn't know what it is that's bothering him, that's disturbing him. So he rises from his bed, he puts on his dressing gown, and he heads to the cabin. He leaves his cabin and heads to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's cabin, where he enters and he isn't noticed. He does all of this on the sly quietly. He doesn't. They're never awakened, and he ferrets around within their cabin until he comes across the commission, uh, the king's commission that was written out by the secretary. And he takes the commission. He slips out of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's cabin. Hamlet returns to his own cabin. There he opens the letter, and there he discovers for the first time that he's to be executed. Uh, Again, you can see the story is sounding a bit suspect. And then he says, what he does next is he decides to write out a new commission. He just happens to have paper at hand. He happens to have a pen and ink and a blotter. He has all of this at his disposal. And while he's on the sea, remember, he's able to write it very smoothly without any problems. Again, we're beginning to doubt what Hamlet is telling us here. And at this point, and then Hamlet reminds us that he knows how to write like a secretary, that in his youth he studied that particular practice. He understands the jargon of business. He knows how to, what words to use and what phrases to use because he has that yeoman's practice, he calls it in his story to Horatio. So again, he just happens to know how to write like a scribe, like a clerk. And it's at this point that Horatio interrupts him and asks Hamlet, "Well, what about a seal? You didn't have a royal seal with you." And Hamlet says, "Well, even in that was heaven ordinate. Heaven was guiding me." Because Hamlet says, "I just happen to have my father's signet, my father's ring with the royal seal. I just happen to have that on me." And that's interesting, isn't it? His father, heaven is ordinate. He just happens to have his father's ring with the royal seal with him in his pocket. And he could be referring, again, he could be referring not to the elder King Hamlet's seal, but to his heavenly father's seal of approval. So he has his father's ring, the elder King Hamlet's ring. He just happens to have that as well with him in his pocket. But it's all, again, part of his heavenly father's design and plan. Heaven is ordinate, heaven is guiding him. So he happens to have the ring at hand, his father's, the elderly King Hamlet's ring. He just happens to have wax with him as well. And so he's able to seal the new commission. And then he sneaks back into, and he changes, remember, he changes his name in the commission. He is no longer to be executed by the King of England upon his arrival. But instead, he's replaced his name with the names of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Remember, Hamlet believes that they are conspiring with Claudius, but there's no evidence that they are, that they know the contents of this commission. They're simply following the king's orders, and they've seen Hamlet behaving bizarrely. Remember the play within the play. Uh, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern witnessed this, and they too perhaps believe that Hamlet has been threatening the king. The king has told Rosencrantz and Guildenstern that he doesn't feel safe, and that's why he's having Hamlet shipped to England for Claudius's own safety. So there isn't any proof in the text. There's no evidence to support that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern have been conspiring, that they're part of Claudius's plan here. But Hamlet believes they are. Once again, we see this problem of knowing the other mind. Hamlet believes they are indeed conspiring, which is why Hamlet treats them the way he does in the early scenes in Act 4. Go back and look at those early scenes in Act 4 and look at the insults that Hamlet just heaps upon Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, uh, contending that they are in service of the king and the king is using them for his own ambitious purposes. So, yes, you can look at that. So, Hamlet replaces his name. Instead, he writes the names of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. And so Rosencrantz and Guildenstern will be put to death once they arrive in England and give the king the commission from the king of Denmark, from Claudius. And then Hamlet he's able to sneak back into Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's cabin and place the new commission among their papers or in their coat pockets or wherever he found the original. Supposedly, he found the original commission. And again, he's able to do this without being detected, without awaking them and being detected, being discovered what he's about, what it is he's doing. Um, Yeah, it does seem extraordinary. He's making some extraordinary claims here, isn't he? And remember, we don't have, when you make an extraordinary claim, you need extraordinary proof. You need extraordinary evidence to support that extraordinary claim. And all we have here is Hamlet's testimony. He's relating this story to Horatio. And Horatio, remember Horatio in listening to the story, there are moments where, yeah, Horatio seems to doubt as well. At least Horatio never comes forward and says, "I believe wholeheartedly the story that you're telling me." Uh, no, Horatio never says this. Just as Horatio never agreed with Hamlet after the play within the play, saying that Claudius is indeed responsible for uh, the elder King Hamlet's death. He just says, remember, Horatio simply says, "I observed Claudius's reaction. He did react." At any rate, Then, of course, we have the tale of the pirates. And remember, Hamlet related this story to Horatio in a letter he sent to Horatio. And in this letter, we are informed that the very next day at sea, the second day at sea, a pirate ship was spotted, and the pirate ship accosted Hamlet's ship, and it pulled alongside the ship that Hamlet is sailing. It pulls alongside the ship that Hamlet is sailing on. But rather than attack Hamlet's ship, it simply remains alongside the ship long enough for Hamlet to jump on board the pirate ship. And the moment that Hamlet, and only Hamlet, is on board the ship sails off. Then, according to Hamlet, the pirates discover that Hamlet is the Prince of Denmark, and so they treat him mercifully. And in return for money, they return him to England. In return for Hamlet's promise to pay them, they return him safely and soundly to the shores. They return him rather to Denmark, safe and sound. They return him to the shores of Denmark. That seems rather odd, doesn't it? These merciful pirates and who don't attack the ship, Hamlet's ship, and don't loot or plunder that ship for whatever riches might be on board, particularly when they discover that it's carrying a prince. Why don't they return at that point and loot and plunder the ship? It's quite interesting, isn't it? And remember, it's only the second day at sea that when the pirate ship attacked. So, according to these critics, this ship would not have had time uh, to sail far out into the sea, where it would be much more difficult to uh, be found. So, what has happened here? Uh, Hamlet has known all along, and he has put this plan of action in place. I would argue that it's quite possible that Hamlet had a new commission written out by the secretary before he even set sail. He had that commission on him before he even set sail. And he's still able to command Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, so he may have found a perfect opportunity to distract them, have given them some order, and at that moment he could have replaced uh, the original commission with the new commission, the one that he's had the secretary write out, and that he's hired sailors to simply masquerade as pirates and to simply, on the second day at sea, before this Hamlet's ship has time to sail too far out at sea and be difficult to spot by the so-called pirate ship, Hamlet simply returns, has the sailors uh, uh, pull alongside his ship, and he returns and pays them for their services. And he would have had plenty of time to do this. So it's the best interpretation I've come across. And, many people simply, people in the audience, and even some critics and scholars simply accept Hamlet's word, the story, without even questioning it. Although it is, as I said earlier, it's a fantastic story, isn't it? It's extraordinary claims that he's making here. But most critics believe it is the ghost, and again, a minority, a few dissenting voices say that it is Claudius' secretary who's informed him. Claudius' secretary is loyal to Hamlet and has come to Hamlet with the news. Um, and I belong to that dissenting group. At any rate, twice in this tale that he relates to Horatio, he uses these kinds of phrases. There's a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them how we may. And also, in finding his father's signet, it was heaven ordinate, it was heaven guiding Hamlet's way. It was the Christian God operating behind the scenes here, behind the curtains here. And all of this was divinely ordained. And again, he uses that phrase here there's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. So when Hamlet's relating this story to Horatio, he certainly is omitting quite a few details, isn't he? And he's not telling Horatio the truth, at least not the entire truth here. He's concealing much from Horatio. Again, Hamlet, remember, although Horatio has gained Hamlet's confidence to a large degree, Hamlet is still suspicious of all those around him. He has lost his faith in humanity. And so he trusts Horatio. I'm not saying that he doesn't trust Horatio, but not to the point where he wants to reveal all to Horatio. And more importantly, is that I think Hamlet believes that all this does happen uh, because it is designed, it is planned, that he is simply working, uh, that he is simply in the hands of his God and doing his God's bidding. And in that sense, he is telling the truth. This is all planned. It has already been ordained, divinely ordained. It is heavenly ordinate. And so Hamlet, in Hamlet's mind, he believes he's speaking the truth here. That what he's telling Horatio is fundamentally, essentially, the truth. One could argue that he has to rationalize having Rosencrantz and Guildenstern sent to their death, certainly, even though Hamlet believes that they're conspiring against him. It may be a further way for Hamlet to rationalize uh, his act of having them beheaded upon their arrival in England. But this idea of Hamlet believing that he is being acted on, that he is a kind of puppet, and his God is the puppet master pulling the strings, that is a dangerous idea, isn't it? And I would argue that it does delay Hamlet. It is another causal factor in his delay because he can be a man of action. He shows himself he can certainly be a man of action. But when it comes to taking revenge, Hamlet has decided to simply sit back and whatever will be, will be. He will let it happen. He will let the Christian God do the acting. And Hamlet will simply be a puppet on the strings here, acting on behalf of the Christian God. And that's what he says here to Horatio back on page 1489. There is a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. And concerning this idea that Hamlet's uneasy about the duel, Hamlet says next, if it be now, in other words, Hamlet's death, if it be now, 'tis not to come. If the Christian God has decided that I am to die in this duel with Laertes, that Laertes and Claudius are putting in place, then if it is to be now, then it won't be to come. In other words, there's nothing that I can do about it. It's already decided. If it be not now, if it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. Again, it's already written. The script is written. In this case, it isn't a deterministic script. It's a heavenly script written by an all-knowing, all-powerful God. You can't change the script. You're not free to change that script. There's nothing you can do. You can think, you can imagine that you're free to choose, but no, because then Hamlet's God would not, right? He would not be all-knowing. If you change the script, the heavenly Hamlet's heavenly Father would not be all-knowing. You would have gone also against his desire, his will, his power. So you can't change the plan. You can't change the script. You aren't free. If it be now, 'tis not to come. If Hamlet's death be now, 'tis not to come. It won't be in the future. If it be not to come, if it's not in the future, it will be now. And then he repeats. Look what he says here. He says it a third time. If it be not now, yet it will come. If I'm not killed during this duel with Laertes, then it will inevitably happen. I will. I will, in the end, at some point, die. He says, and he sums up, the readiness is all. I simply need to place my hands in the hands of my God and be ready for what it is he has determined and decided will be. Uh, Interesting, this idea of a divinity that shapes our ends, that heaven is ordinate. There's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. So let's do turn to Hamlet's death. Let's turn to the end of the play. I'm on page 1493 in your anthologies. Again, we're still in Act 5, Scene 2. And let's pick up here at line where Hamlet, remember, ostensibly, it's supposed to be simply a sporting match between Laertes and Hamlet, but that Laertes and Claudius have conspired. Laertes uh, not only Laertes has not only removed the foil from the tip of his sword, but he's also uh, envenomed, as he says, the point of the sword. So the point of the sword is poisoned. And he manages during Laertes manages during the duel, which again is everyone at court watching the duel is imagining that it's simply that the two men are simply engaged in a sporting match. That Laertes manages during the duel to uh, stab Hamlet, to uh, swipe Hamlet, and so Hamlet does receive the venom, and he is dying. He has been informed. Laertes informs him that he is dying. Um, brings up an interesting point. Let's turn back to the page just opposite 1492. Yes, at line 310, Laertes informs Hamlet that the king's to blame. That Hamlet, Laertes says, the king is to blame. This is the king's design. That I've been working with the king. We've been conspiring. And notice how Laertes, at this point at least, doesn't take the blame. It's the king's to blame. And it's at this point that Hamlet cries out, the point in venom to, then venom to thy work. And he stabs the king. And the courtiers call out treason. They see Hamlet murdering the king. Let's recall here that Hamlet, and the king even cries out, oh, yet defend me, friends, I am but hurt. And then Hamlet, after stabbing the king, he tells Claudius, he says, hear thou incestuous, murderous, damned Dane. Notice Hamlet focusing here on incest again. Murderous, damned Dane, drink off this potion. Is thy union here? Remember that the king has also poisoned the chalice, the cup that Hamlet was to drink from, but doesn't. Gertrude drinks from the cup instead. Drink off this poison. There's some poison remaining in the cup. And Hamlet's words to Claudius at this point, is thy union here? His union, Claudius's union with Gertrude in death. Follow my mother. You can still see Hamlet's bitterness and disgust with his mother and her relationship with Claudius. And the idea of follow my mother, Hamlet imagines, of course, Claudius is damned. He's a damned Dane. His soul will be damned to hell. So it suggests that Claudius also believes that his mother, because of her incestuous relationship with Claudius, which is forbidden according to Orthodox Christianity, that it is a sin, and that she too has been damned. Her soul as well has been damned, and the king here dies. Notice when Hamlet kills Claudius, again, I'll argue it again, and I haven't found any other critics to make this point. Maybe there are some out there, but I haven't come across any. Hamlet can't know that Claudius is a murderer, that Claudius murdered his father. Simply cannot know. He only thinks he knows because of his interference in the play within the play scene. Remember, in the prayer scene, when Hamlet is ready to bring the sword down and murder Claudius, he thinks he knows Claudius is guilty, but only we know in the audience. Shakespeare has provided us with the means to that knowledge, but through Claudius's the means through it's Claudius's soliloquy, right? We understand that Claudius is guilty, but Hamlet can't know this. For all Hamlet knows is Claudius could be an innocent man who's praying on his knees for Hamlet's uh, to be restored to health because of Hamlet's behavior. That's certainly a possibility. So Hamlet can't know. But when he finally kills Claudius, he cannot know that Claudius killed his father. He doesn't have that proof. He thinks he does, but we know that he can't. He doesn't have it. And look, when he kills, also when Hamlet murders Claudius here, everyone at court believes that Hamlet is behaving in a treasonable, they cry out that this is treason, killing a king. It's regicide. This is treason. And even after Laertes calls out that the king's to blame. And I would argue that Hamlet can't know here either that the king is to blame. That the king is to blame for Gertrude's death, for her being poisoned by the chalice, the wine in the chalice that Claudius. We know that Claudius has poisoned the wine because we've heard Claudius conspire with Laertes at the end of Act 4, Scene 7. We know that Claudius is responsible for Gertrude's death. He, indirectly, of course, but nevertheless. And of course, Laertes agreed to go along with to conspire with Claudius. So Laertes bears responsibility as well. It isn't simply that the king's to blame. Um, and Hamlet can't even know for certain that Claudius is responsible for Hamlet's death. That Claudius and Laertes together conspired to place poison on the tip of Laertes' unbaited sword. And therefore Hamlet dies from the poison. Hamlet is envenomed. He is poisoned by the tip of Laertes' sword when he is scratched or wounded or stabbed by Laertes' sword. Hamlet can't know this for certain either. All he has is Laertes' word, Laertes' testimony. Now, most critics believe, along with Hamlet, that Hamlet knows here. Hamlet can know that the king's to blame for Gertrude's death and for Laertes and for Hamlet's death. Well, for Hamlet's death, and and therefore ultimately for Laertes' death. Remember, during the duel fight, after Laertes strikes Hamlet, Hamlet manages to, during the fight, the swords are exchanged. We can discuss that some other time, how they are exchanged there. But at any rate, yes. So Laertes cries out that the king's to blame for all these deaths, for Gertrude's, for Hamlet's, and for Laertes' own death. Of course, Laertes has to realize that he too is responsible. But Hamlet can't know this simply on Laertes' testimony alone. If I were to walk into a court of law and say, you uh, are responsible, you murdered so and so. If I went in and on my personal testimony gave my personal testimony and accused you of having killed someone, of having murdered someone, that's not evidence. That's not proof. That's hearsay. That's my word. That's all. A court can't convict someone on someone else's word. A court needs more evidence, more proof. So most critics believe that Hamlet can know here, that they argue, for example, that Laertes' words are the words of a dying man, and that, it's conventionally speaking, that the words of a dying man, a man speaks the truth. His last words are always the truth because this idea of Orthodox Christianity, the man longs to be forgiven and to ultimately be rewarded. So uh, you know, traditional Christianity underwrites this idea, upholds this idea that man's final words are words of truth. But can one really know here? I would say no. That Hamlet certainly can't know that what Laertes says is true. But he accepts the words because he wants to accept the words. Again, it's Hamlet's desires. He wants to see Claudius as the murderer of his father and now the murder of his mother and of Hamlet himself. And to some extent, Laertes, he wants to find Claudius to be this incestuous, murderous, damned Dane. And so on page 1493, Hamlet is in the throes of death. He says at line 326 to Horatio, Horatio, I am dead. Thou livest. Report me and my cause aright to the unsatisfied, to those who do not know, who don't understand, to those who are crying out treason. Hamlet wants Horatio to tell his story, to let others know what has occurred. And Horatio, look at Horatio's response here. Never believe it. I am more an antique Roman than a Dane. Here's yet some liquor left. And Horatio grabs the poisoned cup and he's attempting to drink what's remaining, the poison remaining at the bottom of the cup. He's attempting to drink it. He says, I am more an antique Roman than a Dane. This idea, the antique Roman, recall, refuses to be defeated by the enemy. And the antique Romans' servants and slaves refused also as well. They would prefer to commit suicide and die with their masters. Remember, suicide is the courageous, the ennobling act. You will not be defeated by the enemy. And here, this is what Horatio's telling Hamlet, that he'd rather die with his friend, his prince, the man who should have been king. He'd rather commit suicide. And that this is what he wishes to do here. We see Horatio as well has been raised in this culture, the cultural code. We recall the cultural code of military honor, the importance of not dying an undignified death, but not being defeated, vanquished by the enemy. And when all appears lost and hopeless, then you take your own life so that you will not ultimately be humiliated by the enemy. And uh, yes, and Horatio desires to die with his prince rather than to be defeated in the end. And this is surprising, isn't it, from Horatio, coming from Horatio, because Hamlet, throughout the play, or not throughout the play, but several places in the play, Hamlet tells Horatio, Hamlet admires Horatio because Horatio, Hamlet argues, is a dispassionate man. Uh, Someone who's able to remain calm and collected and to keep an emotional distance from whatever from life's ups and downs, its fortunes and misfortunes. Horatio is one of these men, according to Hamlet, who is able to accept the good with the bad and to remain indifferent to each. And uh, this underscores the idea of the cultural code of Stoicism, which is another term on your final exam. This idea of Stoicism the idea that what makes a man, again, this question, what makes a man? And according to the cultural code of the Stoic is a man who accepts the vicissitudes of life, the ups and downs, accepts the good with the bad, and doesn't become emotional, doesn't lose control, remains calm and collected and removed and distant, and doesn't allow life's sufferings and pain, and doesn't allow life's joys and pleasures, doesn't allow either to affect him, but instead does keep this objective distance, realizing that life has its ups and downs, its fortunes and misfortunes. But here we see Horatio not able to control himself and desiring to end his life, desiring to die with his friend and with his prince, Hamlet here. And I think the play is critiquing this idea once again. Remember, the play is critiquing all of these particular cultural codes that Hamlet has been raised to believe in. These codes he subscribes to, the cultural code of military honor, and the cultural code of Christianity, and the cultural code of personal ambition. And here, the cultural code of Stoicism, which is another code that Hamlet he he admires. He admires Horatio, his friend, this man who remains dispassionate and unmoved uh, in facing life's sufferings and pains and hardships. But here again, I think Shakespeare or the play is critiquing this code, um, critiquing all of these codes, because in the end, all of these codes are they are developed out of irrational thinking, and therefore uh, they are dangerous codes. They can cause all sorts of unnecessary harm. And the man, the Stoic, who is dispassionate and who somehow removes himself from not only his own sufferings, but he doesn't allow the horrors around him to disturb him. He doesn't complain in any way. He removes, kind of like a hermit, he distances himself emotionally from all of the pains and the anguishes and the miseries that he sees not only in his own life but in others' life. That no, I think the realist would argue here that one should complain, one should moan and groan, one should become passionate, emotional, but one should use one's passion and emotion in the service of reason, of thinking rationally, of standing up and making the argument, a rational argument, of presenting that empirical evidence, that scientific knowledge, of explaining how that knowledge leads to these particular philosophical truths, these most important values in life. And one shouldn't remove oneself from the human scene, not personally, whatever befalls a particular individual, that they shouldn't somehow react to that. Or what happens to others around one, that they should somehow try to maintain equanimity and dispassion. No, the realist would say no, one must uh, uh, be a person, a man of reason, a woman of reason, and one must stand up and fight for for knowledge, for truth. One must use one's intelligence, and one must complain. One must afflict the comfortable. That's one's job as the superhero, as the janitor. In order to prevent unnecessary harm, one has to be rational and has to speak out. One has to speak out. If one If one is a slave, one has to speak out against slavery. If one witnesses slavery, one has to stand up and speak out. One can't simply sit back and accept. One has to be passionate. But there again, one has to use one's psychology, one's passions, one's desires in the name of reason. So one really doesn't have to be passionate necessarily or become emotional. Many people do, but and as long as it is their passions, their desires are in the service of reason, then that can be a good thing, or that is a good thing. But people can certainly complain and not accept this idea of Stoicism. They can certainly stand up and complain, and they can do so dispassionately as well. I mean, it depends on a particular individual's rhetorical strategy, doesn't it? I mean, some people shout and call people names, and all in service of one of these most important truths. That's how they react. That's their strategy. They believe that's what's required. Other people do so calmly, and that's their particular rhetorical approach is to remain calm and collected and to present an argument without allowing their emotions to interfere. Other people become passionate. Other people become angry, resort to name calling even as part of their rhetorical strategy to get people to think rationally, to wake them up to these injustices, to the unfairness. So yes, I think of the play is critiquing, is criticizing all of these cultural codes that it presents here. The question, what is a man? Is it the man of military honor? Is it the man of faith? Is it the man of personal ambition? Is it the man of stoicism, the man of dispassion, and the man of equanimity? No, the play is saying no, it's ultimately the man of reason. Reason should become one's God, if you will. I'm speaking, of course, metaphorically here. Reason should be Hamlet's God. This is the God he should worship. This is the God he should strive to emulate, not the man of military honor who seeks revenge to make a name for himself on the battlefield, who welcomes war, all in the name of reputation and honor and glory and fame. It's not the man of faith. It's not the man who seeks a reward in the end by emulating his God, a heavenly reward. It's not the man who takes it upon himself to act upon what he believes to be true when there is simply no evidence to support his belief. That the man of faith has the potential even to become a dangerous man. Even those who claim, well, that they are moderate, they are people of moderate faith, well, they provide, the realist would argue that they provide room for this extremism in religion. Because if they are willing to believe, if the moderate is willing to believe in these, is willing to hold these faith-based beliefs, then it's simply a matter of how they're interpreting whatever their particular religious text might be. And so they really don't have an argument against the extremist, who is simply the fundamentalist, who is simply interpreting uh, these religious texts differently, the Catholic versus the Protestant. The one who believes is an extremist and believes, yes, there are witches and they should be burned, as opposed to the one, well, no, there are no such things as witches, despite, let's say, for example, what we find in Exodus in the text here. So, yeah, I think it's not the man of faith either. It's certainly not the man of personal ambition, the man who's interested in his own gain, in his own power, and his own fame and glory through material gain and wealth, and whatever it might be, its own needs should be met, and others' needs uh, don't matter when it comes to his or her own personal needs. Those are what matter. That's what's all important. And here we see it's not the man, the Stoic. It's not the stoical man here. The stoical man can't have an impact for change, right? The man who's a stoic won't stand up against sexism or racism or homophobia or speciesism, right? The stoic will accept, uh, try to remove himself emotionally. And here also, look how this particular code fails Horatio at this moment. It does fail him. If the right buttons are pushed, the Stoic uh, can't resist, allows his emotions to overwhelm him. In this case, it's the code of military honor that Horatio is upholding here. And so, yes, all of these codes, I would argue, the play is saying are ultimately faulty because they are irrational and therefore they can lead to unethical behavior. People act on their beliefs. They behave according to what they believe, what they've been raised to believe. So it's a critique also. It's a challenge to these cultural dependencies that many people have. A challenge for them to question them, think about them. Are they causing unnecessary harm? Some that we pointed out to get a better understanding of the cultural dependencies that Hamlet and the lovers in the Midsummer Night's Dream, what they've become addicted to. We've talked about some of our own addictions and our own dependencies, right? We talked about participating in organized sports. People are addicted to it. No, the man of reason, the realist, would say no, it causes unnecessary harm. Uh, Bringing children into the world, again, the realist would argue no, again, there's no need to do that, to cause that harm. Eating meat, we talked about that as well. And the realist says no, there's no need to engage in torture and kill animals simply because one enjoys a pepperoni pizza. But no, it's irrational. So, hunting, fishing, no. No, these human pleasures are irrational. We need to challenge them. We need to stand up. We can't become the Stoic and sit back and say, well, it's simply, you know, if other people choose to do it, if that suffering and harm is going on, I need to remain emotionally distant from that and to not become engaged or to act. So Hamlet won't have any of this either, this idea of Horatio taking his own life. But why? What does Hamlet say? Horatio cries out again at line 230, never believe it, I am more an antique Roman than a Dane. Here's yet some liquor left, and he grabs the cup ready to drink. And Hamlet forcibly calls out and grabs the cup from Horatio's hands and says, as thou art a man, give me the cup. There's that idea again. What is it that makes a man? Let go. By heaven, I'll have it. Interesting, isn't it, here? The idea of know that you are, it's again, heaven. It's heaven's desire. Hamlet acting through heaven's desire. Horatio is to remain behind. He is not to take his own life. He is not to follow Hamlet in death. Let go, by heaven, I'll have it. Things, and look, he explains here. Oh God, Horatio, and again he appeals to his God. Oh God, for the sake of, right, our Heavenly Father. Oh God, Horatio, what a wounded name. Things standing thus unknown shall live behind me. Oh, and isn't this so revealing? It's about Hamlet, and it's about Hamlet's wounded name. His wounded name that he shall leave behind me. It's all about Hamlet's needs. isn't it? His desires, his ego, his name, his reputation, the name of Hamlet. And so, what does he tell Horatio? I need you to serve me, to serve our God. This is what our God wishes. Our God wishes to restore this wounded name. Oh God, let go by heaven, I'll have it. Oh God, Horatio, what a wounded name. Things standing thus unknown. Only you know. At least Horatio knows some of the truth here. Part of it. Certainly not all of it. And uh, certainly not how we're interpreting what's been going on in Hamlet's life. If thou didst ever hold me in thy heart. And look here, look again at Hamlet manipulating Horatio. Are you my friend? You've always professed to be my friend, to truly love me, to truly care for me. If you really are my friend, then you won't take your life. You won't end your own suffering, your own pain in this harsh world, but you will remain behind. Look what he says, absent thee from felicity a while. For Hamlet, felicity, of course, is death. Death becomes the cessation of pain and suffering. Hamlet can feel his own suffering, his own hardships, but nobody else's. Horatio is to remain behind. Absent thee from felicity a while, and in this harsh world, draw thy breath in pain. I want you, Horatio, to remain behind. I can see your suffering. I can see your pain. You're wanting to take your own life because you're seeing me die has become too great, too enormous, and you refuse to be defeated. And you wish to die with your prince, with your friend, but oh, if you're my friend, Horatio, you'll stay in this harsh world and draw your breath in pain to tell my story, to restore my wounded name, my reputation. This you'll do for me. So you can see Hamlet is manipulating Claudius. He's playing the friendship card. We've seen this sort of manipulation in the past. Perhaps you've experienced it. Perhaps your friends have told you, if you're really my friend, you'll do this for me. And if you don't do it, then you must not be my true friend. So here we have this, what's happening here? This manipulation on Hamlet's part here. Hamlet wants more than anything for his story to be told, and Horatio is the only man who can do that. And as his friend, as Hamlet's friend, Horatio needs to stay behind. It is, right? Hamlet, by heaven, he cries out, "Oh God!" Right? To understand the importance that this story be told. Remember, Hamlet, I'm still arguing that Hamlet believes that all is unfolding because it is uh, uh, divinely designed. It is the Christian God's plan. And Hamlet dies at line 342. He says, "Oh, I die, Horatio. The potent poison quite o'ercrows my spirit." And he does die, doesn't he? Um, but not before he hears this warlike noise in the distance, this volley of guns, and or this march afar. He hears Fortinbras arriving at Elsinore, and he gives his dying voice. Fortinbras, Hamlet gives his dying voice to Fortinbras to become the next king of Denmark. He has my dying voice, he says. So tell, Horatio wants Fortinbras, I'm sorry, Hamlet wants Horatio to tell Fortinbras. So tell him with the occurrence, tell him what has occurred, more and less. It's an interesting phrase, more and less. Tell him, in other words, present it in the best light that you can. Tell some things relate more, if you will, underscore them more, and other things you can downplay more and less. That's how I interpret these lines. Of course, you could also imagine that Horatio can only tell part of the story. So more or less, here, tell what has occurred more or less, kind of sketch in the details that you're not familiar with. Because again, Hamlet hasn't revealed all to Horatio, just what he believes is necessary, or you know, what he believes he can trust Horatio to know. And then Hamlet dies. And again, these last lines, the rest is silence. These much talked about and variously interpreted lines at the end of the play. Why does Hamlet say here that the rest is silence? Some critics argue that Hamlet has been longing for death, and death, the rest that comes with death, is silence. There are no more pains, and there is no more suffering with death here. And some even argue that um, Hamlet here has indeed lost his faith. The rest is silence. There is no more to come. There is no other world. Of course, the realist would respond that if Hamlet has indeed lost his faith at the very end here, that there just isn't, first of all, the evidence doesn't support it. And the evidence that is here in the text, what we do have here in the text just before Hamlet's death, seems to suggest that just the opposite. But the realist would argue that if indeed Hamlet has lost his faith, is no longer men of faith, he's lost his belief, then the realist would say, unfortunately, it comes too late, because faith-based belief is unfounded and therefore irrational and uh, potentially harmful. Very often is harmful. Um, the rest is silence. Yes, I think it's basically. I would argue that what Hamlet is saying here is that the rest of the story that will be silent. What Horatio doesn't know, or doesn't the details that Horatio doesn't know, that Hamlet did not reveal to Horatio, that's what will remain silence. The rest of Hamlet's story, that the silence, it's the silence of the grave, that Hamlet will take to the grave with him the rest of his story. Again, it's raising that issue of the problem of knowing the other mind. But I would argue here that we know Hamlet's story, don't we? So many critics argue that this play, oh, it's just too complex, and it will always remain a mystery, and all we can do is keep, trying to analyze it and trying to, in the end, try to understand, you know, who Hamlet is and why he behaves the way that he does. It's just, in the end, Hamlet will remain an enigmatic figure, and his actions ultimately, in the end, essentially mysterious. And how can we ever really? The play is just too it just it can't. There are too many ways that you can interpret the play here. I would say no. I think the realist would agree with me. The realist would say no. We know what Hamlet's story is. We know how to interpret this play. That Hamlet's story is the story of a man who is irrational, and the all of the horror that occurs in the play. It's Hamlet's irrationality that is, and other characters' irrationality as well. Their irrational thinking that leads to this kind of catastrophe at the end. All these deaths in the end of the play, in throughout the play and at the end of the play. that's what is happening. It's this irrational thinking that's going on. It's the ego, it's the desire, the psychology that is interfering with the potential. um, Hamlet and other people's potential, other characters' potential to think rationally, to think logically, to deduce these most important truths. And that's what's happened in this play. It's Hamlet caught in his cultural addictions, not questioning them, just accepting them because they, right, in some way they meet his needs too. So he doesn't wish to be a man whose limit has to be limited in his behavior in that sense, does he? Uh, he will accept what his culture has taught him. Yeah, yeah. In his experiences in life, he won't question or challenge uh, these codes, these various cultural codes that have raised him. He's been raised to believe in these codes here. And he does die, an irrational man. The rest is silence. It may be, it, ironically, it may be a good thing that the rest is silence here. I can't imagine the horror that might continue to unfold had Hamlet remained living. Um, and he does, but then, let's remember that he can't feel, he can't suffer. The rest is silence. It's interesting that this text, our anthology, omits the line, "Oh, oh, oh," where Hamlet's his final uh, sounds are the sounds of an animal in agony as he's dying slowly and painfully from being poisoned. And here the lines are omitted. And this tendency again to romanticize death on the stage, uh, death in literature, this romantic view that's being presented here. And you see it in many of the film adaptations of Hamlet too, that Hamlet speaks his final line and then closes his eyes and passes gently from nature into eternity. This romantic view of death that we saw in the description of uh, Gertrude's description of Ophelia's drowning, and we recall the paintings of Ophelia drowning by artists. And in film adaptations, Hamlet's death is presented. Again, it's beautified, it's poeticized, becomes rather, lyrical. It's this romantic view. But yeah, I mean, I wonder why the lines have been omitted here. Perhaps that's why. Perhaps that's why the editor has omitted the lines, because in some texts they're omitted, and in other texts they're kept. And I would strongly argue that they should be kept, because dying by poison, it looks like this particular poison isn't especially quick. It Hamlet takes a full page here to die. So yes, the last sound should be his crying out in agony. And, he is suffering here, and that is what has real value here, is Hamlet's suffering. So once is dead, he can no longer suffer. So if he means by the rest is silence that death means the end to pain and suffering, I would agree with him here. And in that sense, once Hamlet becomes unconscious, once his brain ceases to function, therefore consciousness. Remember, consciousness is a function of the brain. And once the brain ceases to function, consciousness ceases to function. So if the rest is silence, the realist would say death, the Hamlet can no longer be harmed, so death has no real value here. But Hamlet does want to be remembered, and his last thoughts may be those thoughts too. This idea of a wounded name. And what is Horatio's reaction to Hamlet's death? Look what he says. Isn't this fascinating? At the bottom of the page, line 350. Now cracks a noble heart. There's that word noble again. To be or not to be, that is the question. whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows and so forth. The idea of nobility. Again, we see that Hamlet's notion of nobility uh, is warped. This idea of what makes what makes a man, what makes a man noble. He has all these conflicting codes. And I would say I've always made the argument that Hamlet wants to be a man of reason. We can see that. Uh, this is what makes a man. It's the man of reason, the man who's rational, the man who uses his intelligence, that doesn't allow it to go unused, to fuss unused, but uses it and concludes that what is of most value is suffering. But Hamlet here, Horatio, look how he sends him off. Now cracks a noble heart. Good night, sweet prince. But there's a sweet prince. Horatio wishes him a good night. And flights of angels sing thee to thy rest. The image of angels carrying Hamlet as he ascends into heaven for his eternal reward. He is a sweet prince. He is with a noble heart. Now cracks a noble heart. Are we to believe these words? Many scholars believe them. Many critics do. Most people sitting in the audience, most of them romantics, believe Horatio's words. Now cracks a noble heart. Good night, sweet prince. But again, the realist would say, let's remember who Horatio is, a man who was just willing to die for Hamlet. He wanted to die with his prince, with his good friend. This is certainly love, but we know what Shakespeare, at least the play, when we looked at A Midsummer Night's Dream, we know what Shakespeare thinks of this emotion known as love. It's a four-letter word. It's biased, it's prejudiced. We've said it before, it's nepotistic, it's racist, it's sexist, it can be all these things. It's nationalist, be all these things because one becomes attached, one becomes addicted to those people one comes into contact with most often. Friendships are developed, love occurs, and people do become biased. They forget that a brain in pain is a brain in pain. No, it's my child that matters. My child matters more than your child or other people's children. What's really important is my family, my child, my country, my family, my species, my God matters. I love, right? We said it before, my Ku Klux Klan member. I love my Ku Klux Klan member, my neo-Nazi party member, my terrorist organization is what's matter. I love my fellow terrorists. So this idea that Horatio is biased, and he's the one left behind to tell Horatio Hamlet's story. And we can see here how he will present Hamlet. He will present Hamlet as a man with a noble heart, a sweet prince. And then we see the other voice at the very end of the play on page 1494. Fortinbras has just arrived. How convenient. Fortinbras arrives at the palace of Elsinore at the moment that not only is Claudius dead, and the king is dead, King Claudius is dead, the Queen Gertrude is dead, uh, Polonius, of course, is dead. Uh, one of the members of the chief of staff, if you will, is dead. And Hamlet, the heir to the throne, the prince, is dead as well, and Fortinbras arrives. And look what Fortinbras says. Of course, at the very last lines here are given to Fortinbras. That's interesting, isn't it? He's had, we've never heard him. We've heard him speak once before, but here he has the exit lines, the final lines of the play. Look what he says at line 385. Let four captains bear Hamlet like a soldier to the stage, for he was likely, had he been put on, to have proved most royal, and for his passage the soldier's music and the right of war speak loudly for him. So Fortinbras is giving Hamlet a military funeral, the right of the soldier, the right of war, the soldier's music. It's to speak loudly, and Hamlet is to be carried, to be paraded to the stage. And he was likely to have proved most royal. What's going on here? Why is Fortinbras, who had never known Hamlet as speaking these lines, yeah, I mean, notice the metaphor here that Fortinbras uses, bear Hamlet like a soldier to the stage. I would argue that Fortinbras is all too well that he, right this minute, Fortinbras is on a stage before the court of Denmark, before the noblemen, the men in power. We recall that Fortinbras is an ambitious man, a man of revenge. And he wanted to revenge himself on Denmark for his father's death. He wanted to restore the family name of Norway. He wants to make a name for himself. Right? He's a man of military honor, and he's also the ambitious man. What's he doing here at Elsinore? He was told, said he had permission to march through Denmark on the way to fighting the Poles, but not to suddenly arrive, unexpected, unannounced, before at the palace, at the court of Denmark. What's this man of ambition, personal ambition and desire, this man who upholds, who endorses the cultural code of military honor, who seeks fame? What does he desire? And how convenient when he arrives that all those in power are now dead. And surely Fortinbras realizes this is his opportunity. He has the dying voice, Hamlet's dying voice as well. And this is his opportunity to seize the crown of Denmark, to ascend to the throne. He's a political man as well, isn't he, here? And so naturally, the words he used, he wants to promote, he wants to present Hamlet in the best possible light, because Hamlet won't be the next king of Denmark. And so Fortinbras wants to, he's thinking of all of these powerful Danish noblemen around him, and he's wanting to make an impression on them. He's wanting to make this transition. He's wanting them to accept this transition. He would be a foreign king sitting on the throne here. He's from Norway. So he's being politically savvy here, isn't he? So I would argue that his subscribing to this cultural code of military honor is what has led him to the court to begin with, to Elsinore, to the palace to begin with, because he wants to revenge his father's name. And when he arrives and finds that he doesn't need to fight, that all the fighting, that the Danes have fought and killed each other, then he can step in. How should he assume power? What's the easiest route? That is here. He's the new political man on the throne, the man who's interested in personal gain. We end where we began. Claudius's ascension to the throne. Here we have Fortinbras, a man very much, it seems, like Claudius. And yet, it's amazing how many critics and how many scholars and how many people, how many audience members, readers of the play, how they agree with Fortinbras's lines here, even though we can see this is a rhetorical ploy on his part. It's a strategy. So we have two voices that speak for Hamlet at the end of the play. Horatio, Hamlet's personal close friend, a man who was willing to die for his prince, a man who's obviously biased, obviously prejudiced, who wants to present Hamlet in the best light possible. And we have here Fortinbras, a political man, an ambitious man, a man who wants the throne of Denmark to revenge his family honor and reputation and name. These two voices are what we hear. The tributes to Hamlet are being offered by these two voices at the end of the play. So, how are we to read this? The realist would ask, how would you read this? How would you, what would be your interpretation? Um, Many critics, well, I don't know about many, yeah, a few critics offer that ironically enough, this play ends happily for Hamlet. It's a kind of happy ending for Hamlet. And they argue, if you think about it, think for a moment. First of all, Hamlet is forgiven by Laertes for having killed Laertes' father Polonius. And Hamlet is also forgiven by Laertes for having killed Laertes. Laertes' dying breath. He asks Hamlet, he gives Hamlet forgiveness. He forgives Hamlet for trespassing again, but for killing his father and for killing Laertes. And Laertes asks Hamlet to forgive him, and Hamlet does. So Hamlet can forgive, right? Hamlet is forgiven, and Hamlet can forgive his trespassers as well. Interesting, though, isn't it? Ironically, both subscribing to this idea of revenge, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And after all the blood and the harm, after all the milk has been spilt, the mess has been made, then they can forgive one another. Then they can forgive their trespasses after they've already caused harm to one another, to each other. It's then that they uh, uh, exchange forgiveness. But nevertheless, Hamlet is forgiven, and he forgives Laertes. Uh, and also, if you think about it, Hamlet's mother, Gertrude, Hamlet believes that she is an adulterer. We don't never have proof of this. We've talked about it before in previous lectures. But Hamlet believes that she is an adulterer. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Her relationship was an adulterous one, her relationship with Claudius. And she is being justly punished for her crime, for her mortal sin. Thou shalt not commit adultery. And so she is being punished, but Hamlet gets to leave her to heaven in the end, doesn't he? She will be punished by the Christian God. Hamlet does not commit matricide. He doesn't kill his mother. And also, if you think about it, Ophelia dies as well. Hamlet professes that he once loved Ophelia, and the romantic that Hamlet, being a romantic, yes, he at a time he believed in this idea of true love. Um, but then Hamlet believes that all women are frail like his mother. Frailty thy name is woman. That all women are inconstant and unfaithful. That they're all corrupt. They're all lustful. And all women make fools of men. Wives make fools of their husbands. And remember his tirade against Ophelia, get thee to a nunnery. What shouldst thou be but a breeder of sinners? All women, all men are sinners. And so Ophelia, it's best, isn't it, that she is dead here. She's now removed from the world as she would be removed in a nunnery from the world, so she can't corrupt others. She can't be a breeder of sinners any longer. And this is how Hamlet sees women to the very end of this play. His mother is a wretched woman, oh wretched queen. Her relationship is an incestuous one. So Hamlet certainly has this deep, deep distrust of women. They're all fickle, they're all inconstant, they're all frail and weak. They should all get to a nunnery. And then we have Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Hamlet believes that they conspired against him, that they were acting in the service of the king, Hamlet's enemy. And so they too deserve their punishment. Hamlet believes he's on the side of the good, the side of the elder King Hamlet, the side of the Christian God, that Claudius is the villain to be damned to hell for all eternity. This great contest, as the romantic Hamlet sees this great contest between the forces of good and the forces of evil. And so Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, they too deserve to be punished, to be beheaded in Hamlet's stead by the King of England. And of course, we have Claudius. Hamlet certainly believes that Claudius deserves to be damned. His soul, Claudius' soul, deserves to be punished for all eternity in the Christian hell, to be tortured and tormented in that place of fire and brimstone. Yes, Hamlet, you can see his desires for his enemy to be in hell. And again, then we remember that Hamlet just can't possibly know that Claudius has committed any crime. How can he know? So, and for Hamlet himself, think about it. Horatio will remain behind to tell Hamlet's story. His good friend, his close personal friend, will remain behind. Hamlet's also able to give his dying voice to Fortinbras, for Fortinbras to become the next king of Denmark. Hamlet's really yeah, I mean, he's taking care of business, isn't he? He's neatly wrapping up all the business here in this world before he exits. And he does get to exit this harsh world where one breathes in pain. Hamlet, of course, always concerned most about his own suffering. Once or twice he manages to see that other people suffer, but then it's his own desires, his own egos that in the end he becomes caught up, trapped in his own needs, his self-interest, his ambitions, his desire for revenge, his desire to harm others who've harmed him. His harms matter most. That's just all too human, isn't it? It's so difficult to think rationally. Our psychology gets in the way, our culture gets in the way, our biology gets in the way. We want more of the pie. We can't get enough of the pie. And, let others be damned. They don't need the lean beggars. Ah, well, as long as I'm one of the fat kings. So Hamlet does get to escape this world and he doesn't commit suicide. Remember, for Hamlet, the Christian, suicide is punishable also by eternal damnation. And Hamlet gets to escape this world without taking his own life. Without taking, for the Christian, remember, it's the cowardly way out. So Hamlet does, some critics have pointed out, for Hamlet, the story ends well, doesn't it? It's a happy ending. Happy ending indeed. But then, what do we see before us, before the curtains close? Before the curtain drops, what is it that we see before us on this stage? What does the individual of reason, what does the realist say? The realist who subscribes to this tragic narrative of the human story. We see a stage littered with corpses. a stage soaked in blood. And we do. We have to ask ourselves, does Hamlet's story end happily? And I would say no. I would disagree with people who believe that we should see Hamlet's story, see Hamlet as a noble prince who was simply overwhelmed by the situation he finds himself in. Yes, true, he is in a deterministic prison, but he does have this ability to reason. Unfortunately, he's been poorly programmed, and nothing occurs in the play here uh, to program him to somehow, you know, uh, take care of the viruses uh, in his programming here. Nothing occurs that way. And I would argue that the realist would say that the man of reason would say that Hamlet's story is a tragic one because Hamlet ultimately is an irrational man. And that the play is presenting this idea of what makes a man. It answers the question for us indirectly. What makes a man is his ability to use his brain, to be rational, and to understand, to take a hard look at the empirical evidence before him, and to arrive at these most important truths, these philosophical truths, that this evidence, this empirical evidence, this proof reveals. So Hamlet's story is a tragic one because Hamlet uh, is an irrational man. What is a man? The realist would say a man is a rational being. What is a man? What is a woman? What makes a man? What makes a woman? It's reason. But also, ironically, tragically, what is it that makes most men and women in this world? What are most men and women in this world? Most are irrational thinkers. It's difficult. I would argue that we are all, to some extent, irrational thinkers. Our psychologies get in our way, our addictions, our dependencies, our needs, our wants. It's very difficult to be a janitor. You've got to clean up your own, you've got to try to clean up as much of your own mess as you can. And most people don't want to spend their lives cleaning up the mess they make and cleaning up other people's mess as well. Trying to clean up, you can never clean it all up. The person with the tragic view of the story, the human narrative would claim. And the realist would argue as well. The realist with this view. You can't clean up all of the mess, but you can try to prevent more mess and you can try to reduce that mess. Most men and women, I think the realist would say, most men and women are not people of reason. Most aren't striving to be alpha thinkers. They're content to be beta thinkers. They don't want to think. It's too tough. It's too tough being the superhero. Too many responsibilities, too many limitations. No, that alpha thinking, it's not for them. It gets in the way, it limits them. They can't seek their own personal happiness and gain and pleasure. What fun is that? They want to be entertained. Most people aren't striving to be as tiny a jackass as they can. Most people, they're being the big jackass when they just don't care. When they get on the highway, they don't care if they're speeding, if they're passing the speed limit and endangering other people on the highway. They don't care if they're cutting people off and not using their blinkers. To hell with the other people. It's all about me and my needs on that highway of life. Yes, this is what the realist, with this tragic understanding of our story would argue. And this stage, because most people, because Hamlet himself, and most of these characters, yes, all of these characters in this play are irrational thinkers. And you see the harm, the unnecessary suffering that this kind of irrational thinking, where you see where it leads. You see where it leads in the end. It ends with a stage, as I said, littered with these dead bodies. But what was most important here? This is what Hamlet forgets. These people, these characters on the stage now dead, what Hamlet forgets is he forgets that Polonius suffered. Laertes suffered. Hamlet forgets that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern suffered, that Ophelia and Gertrude, Claudius, yes, Claudius too, his was a brain in pain. Ophelia, Gertrude, Claudius, they all suffered. That's what occurred here in this play. That's what we're left thinking about at the end of this play. And one should ask Hamlet, I think, what he thinks of his code of military honor now, and the code of personal ambition, or even the code of Stoicism. And where has his Christian God been all this time? The one with all the power and all the knowledge, the all-loving deity, sitting on the sidelines, watching the horror unfold, not saving, not rescuing those who are suffering and in pain. And then finally, just who and what was that ghost? What do you think? How do you interpret this play? Knock, knock. Who's there? Be gone before somebody drops a house on